U.S. newspapers, they are folding at an alarming rate, and some people are switching to online only.
Amazon founder Jeff Bezos sent a thunderbolt through the media world this week.
Now, with the growth of the internet, making money has been something of a struggle for the print industry as a whole.
Sales and profits both are shrinking, with circulation down nearly 40%.
For over 300 years, news has arrived on our doorsteps as newspapers. Publishers relied on paper, on ink, presses, trucks, and shops. Many newspapers spend nearly half their budget just getting their content to you. But that, as they say, is yesterday's news. This is the digital world. In an instant, news travels to your laptop, smartphone, or tablet. Geography has disappeared. Words written in Paris are available on the New York subway. And while the way we get news is undergoing a revolution, so is the nature of news itself. San Antonio, Texas. Hundreds of journalists gather here from all over the United States to discuss the current state and the future of their profession. Journalists like Laura Frank.
I was a reporter at the Rocky Mountain News, an investigative reporter at the state's oldest newspaper. But it ended when it closed in 2009, and it was devastating.
On that day, the paper's owners walked into the newsroom to tell the reporters that their jobs were at an end.
We're going to announce just in the next few minutes that we're going to put the Rocky Mountain News up for sale. Something that would have been unthinkable just a few months ago.
And it was really a shock for the country, I think. It got a lot of attention around the United States when that happened, because it was the first major metropolitan newspaper to close in the United States.
During the last 15 years of the digital revolution, dozens of newspapers have vanished in the United States. And more than 30% of journalists have lost their jobs.
The entire industry was collapsing around us, so it wasn't as if we could, no, we'll just go get other journalism jobs. There were no other journalism jobs. I was wondering if I was going to have to go work at Starbucks.
All the journalists here in San Antonio have had a rough ride in the last couple of years. The basic financials of the media business have changed completely.
What you have to understand about American media is the profit margins that American media were used to getting. I've worked at newspapers that were getting 40 or 45% return on investment. Those days are long gone, and they're probably not going to come back.
But surprisingly, the journalists here in San Antonio are decidedly optimistic.
We've experienced the technology that causes the disruption, the internet and the digital. But now, I think the technology really is going to add to being able to do the reporting and being able to disseminate it in a way so that we've felt the pain, now we're going to feel the benefit.
But getting to there from here means changing the way we think about news. When traditional newspapers began to die in the United States, the big question was, what's going to replace them? The answer is all sorts of things. New ways to get news, new ways to read it, new ways to share it. But it's still early days for the brave new digital world. Days of experimentation, where some win and some lose.
After 80 years, Newsweek will print its last edition.
Newsweek is going all digital and ending its run as a print publication that began in 1933.
Newsweek is the second largest weekly magazine after Time. Newsweek's circulation dropped more than 50%, from 3.1 million to 1.5 million.
IBT Media has bought Newsweek for an undisclosed amount. The magazine's new owner hopes to succeed where others have failed.
Well, I think anybody who tells you that they know what the news business will look like in 5 years is either lying or delusional. The simple answer is, we don't know.
Dan Gross was a senior editor at Newsweek. He was there in 2012 when the magazine took a bold step.
And the decision was made to essentially turn it from a print publication into a digital publication, to sort of meet consumers where they were, try a different model.
Newsweek merged with an online brand called The Daily Beast. It continued as online only. That was unsuccessful. A year later, it was sold again. Its story is now a cautionary tale in the publishing industry.
We now work in an industry today that didn't exist 5 years ago. I work for The Daily Beast, which is a publication that didn't exist 5 or 6 years ago. And many of the publications that existed and that I worked at when I got into this industry 25 years ago don't exist anymore.
I would say there's both more optimism on creating new news outlets and probably a little bit more pessimism on the future of the legacy outlets.
Professor Bill Gruskin specializes in digital journalism at Columbia University in New York City, one of the most respected journalistic institutions in the world, home of the Pulitzer Prize.
I think the biggest problem is the news organizations that are just kind of holding tight and saying, you know, at the end of the day, we have to do things pretty much the way we've done them for the last 20, 30, 50 years. And that, to me, is the really scary prospect for a lot of news organizations.
The old distribution for media used to be bundling up a newspaper and hiring a kid and throwing it to somebody's house. And now distribution is getting people to come to your homepage, but then also essentially getting the internet and the world to do the heavy lifting for you, to share it around.
In the digital world, many publishers are still struggling to transform, trying to turn themselves from physical papers to online news sites. In the United States, the process has been going on for a decade. In Europe, it's still early days.
It's going to happen in Europe just as it did in the US, and a lot of it is simply demographic. Every day, some people die. Those people were people who were weaned on print, grew up and grew old on print. And every day, new people enter their consuming lives. They enter the key demographic, as we say.
Here in Amsterdam, Peter van der Meers is editor of the NRC Handelsblad, one of the largest and most important papers in the country. Van der Meers sees his industry and his newsroom facing a major transition.
Ik vrees voor heel veel kranten een hele moeilijke volgende 10, 15 jaar, waarin dat we niet onze kop in het zand moeten steken, waarin er heel veel journalisten op straat gaan komen. De grote vraag is, en ik denk dat dat wereldwijd is voor alle markten, zal dat op een niveau kunnen blijven, het niveau dat we nu hebben. Dit huis heeft 200 voltijdse journalisten en nog eens een kleine 1000 medewerkers. Dus dat is een immens grote operatie. Gaan we die operaties kunnen in stand houden? Daar heb ik hele grote vragen bij.
European newspaper sales have only declined slightly and are far less dependent on advertising, unlike their American counterparts. However, their future is also digital.
Ja, als je vanaf nul een nieuwsmerk opbouwt, moet je het digitaal doen. Dat is duidelijk. Dan moet je niet meer met een krant beginnen. Dit gezegd zijnde is een van de grote wensen van heel veel digitale merken, is min of meer een analoge aanwezigheid ergens.
Yet existing newspapers have to straddle two worlds.
And so the established brands have this burden of trying to meet their existing consumers where they are, at the same time trying to invest and create the next iteration when the technology is changing every 6 months to 12 months.
Misunderstanding with many people is they say, oh, something's happening with newspapers, no one reads a newspaper anymore. That's not true. It's just the business model that doesn't work for them anymore.
The Pers Group is the largest newspaper publisher in Belgium and Holland and prints 7 national dailies. The owner of this publishing giant, Christian van Tillo, wants his people to never lose focus on print.
This was my greatest fear, I think, in the beginning of this decade, when internet was such a hype, and everybody said, you know, paper is just dead wood and or dead trees, and it's over with this industry. What we said is, let's try to develop our news sites with digital savvy people, and let's continue to concentrate on papers.
And that's the same for papers on the other side of the Atlantic. The New York Times, perhaps the world's best-known newspaper, over 150 years old, its trials and tribulations have made it the bellwether of the publishing industry in the United States. It's tried several large-scale experiments to adapt to modern technology.
We've gotten to a point where we're going to be uncomfortable about the pace of change for a very long time to come.
Paul Smurl leads the digital strategy for the New York Times, where the talk is no longer only about websites, but ever newer ways to read news.
Mobile is the most recent sort of disruptor or enabler, depending on your point of view. We see more people using mobile devices, both phones and tablets. Smartphone penetration in the U.S. is at an all-time high. I believe at the end of this year, 1 out of every 3 U.S. adults will have a tablet. The penetration in Europe is lower, but I think that will come over time.
We really believe that the explosion of mobile devices now is going to change our industry, and that publishing is going to be and print and electronic, and will move more and more in the electronic way.
As papers migrate to multiple digital platforms, there are good financial reasons for keeping the physical newspaper.
You know, that's the question about whether at some point we'll stop printing the paper, I think, is a common one. I don't think it's going to happen in my professional lifetime, and it may not happen in my lifetime. There is a very devoted audience. We have over 1.1 million home delivery subscribers.
I'll be dead, I guess, for a long time. No, it's not going to happen it's not going to happen anytime soon. We are still printing 1.4 million copies per night. We don't see a major decline in our circulation.
Fantillo thinks the transition to digital must be made carefully.
I think it has all to do with the choice you make with respect to your newsrooms. Is when you ask an editor to switch from paper to online, he's not going to concentrate on the paper anymore. And that's what happened in many news houses, is that people didn't make a choice of being good with their paper on paper and electronically. They just said, no, we're going to switch. And if you switch and you don't concentrate on how to make a good paper, well, the paper is going to be lousy, and people are just going to leave your paper and they'll cancel their subscription.
The digital audience and the print audience are becoming more and more separate from each other. And people who want print really want it. People who want digital, whether it's on a computer or on an iPhone, they really want that experience. Some people want both, but in fact, they're actually two very different audiences in their demographics and their reading habits and that.
We have many more technologically driven people in our company, designing websites, designing apps, having the right engineering, and then a seamless transition to IT. That has become very important.
Dan Gross says an entire generation has now come of age during the digital revolution.
The same way people don't know what a rotary phone is, right? The kids who are growing up today will really not know how to read a newspaper.
When I look at our news students, I see very few of them bringing a newspaper into school every day. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not consuming news or reading news or watching news, but they're much more likely to be doing that on a device they can hold in their hand.
And what they're reading, they're most often reading for free.
So, go back 15 years. When a lot of news organizations were just getting up online. And people thought the main thing you have to do is accumulate as big of an audience as you possibly can, and then we'll figure out later on how to make money on it, probably through advertising.
It's very easy to look back with 20/20 hindsight and say this was a mistake. We could have changed the course of events. So rather than describe it as an original sin, I guess I would say it's something that probably helped support the growth of the web platform, which was immature, 10, 15 years ago.
Ik ben heel bang van gratis. Ik ben er echt van overtuigd dat uitgevers, toen het internet kwam, een fout gemaakt hebben door te zeggen van we gaan nu alles gratis gaan weggeven om groot te worden.
This shouldn't have been a big surprise. A number of people were dropping their print newspapers subscription and the ad revenue that would go with it because they figure I can just go online and read it a couple of times a week. I don't really need the newspaper.
With newspapers giving away their content for free, a new kind of online website has emerged. One that took their free content and used it to make money for itself.
Sure, she's one of the most powerful women in media. Her website, The Huffington Post, was a game changer.
AOL has announced that it will acquire the liberal political blog site, The Huffington Post, for $315 million Monday morning.
The Huffington Post, one of the web's most successful news portals, is launching a German edition.
Ariana's detractors say aggregator sites like The Huffington Post, partly powered by unpaid bloggers, are killing journalism.
This is the Huffington Post. Founded in 2005, it's one of the most popular news websites in America. It's also the best known of news aggregators. Executive International Editor Nicholas Sabloff explains.
I think most people's definition of aggregation would probably be to produce a piece of content where some of the information is originating somewhere else. So, perhaps it was originated in a report from the Associated Press, and so we created an article based on that.
The Huffington Post creates its own content and its readers post 1 million comments a month. It also links to stories from online newspapers, but far more controversially, it uses information taken from those stories, not only in the US, but around the world.
Today we are in Canada, the UK, France, Spain, Italy, and Japan, with many more markets to come in the next 18 months. And we've really found that the platform and the approach to content and engagement and social has really traveled well in those markets. So we go in, find a team of local editors, and a local partner to build a, edition that really fits, in local language, that really has the opportunity to be not just the Huffington Post in French, but, a great news site for a French reading audience.
Many European newspaper editors and publishers see this as a threat.
Het is diefstal, het is pure diefstal. Een van mijn grote frustraties hier, in NRC stoppen we heel veel energie in onderzoeksjournalistiek. En binnen de seconde staat het resultaat van al dat zoekwerk op alle Nederlandse sites en een minuut later op alle sites, bij wijze van spreken, in de hele wereld. En ik krijg daar 0 voor in retour. En dan zeggen die sites, en terecht vanuit hun standpunt, ja, maar wij doen niets anders dan aggregeren van nieuws. Maar eigenlijk zijn het zweetdieven.
If someone aggregates, and when we're talking about aggregation, it's really copy-paste. To build his own business, it's plain theft. It's as simple as that. We're talking about that to the European Commission as well. It's something that has to be banned. It's not because it's easy and because it's fun that you have to allow it. It's very simple. If we continue to allow it, there will be no content anymore 10 years from now.
The Huffington Post sees aggregation differently.
If you are on the web and not doing aggregation, you're not, that's a really important thing to be able to deliver to the readers. So for people who are, let's say, concerned about aggregation, perhaps that's, they have not spent as much time on the web and sort of how content is consumed there.
Edoui Plenel is the former editor of Le Monde in Paris. His concern with the way the Huffington Post works is that it threatens the very nature of news.
Notre ennemi, c'est le divertissement, entertainment. Nous, c'est l'information et on a le divertissement. Et le divertissement essaye de l'emporter sur l'information. Infotainment. Et il a un allié que symbolise de manière caricaturale Fox News aux États-Unis, ou voir les succès comme le Huffington, qui sont des agrégats d'opinion, c'est l'opinion. Prendre l'opinion. Eh ben, écoutez, je fais du journalisme, puisque regardez, il y a du débat d'opinion. Mais l'opinion, c'est pas la démocratie. Une démocratie vivante, c'est celle où le débat d'opinion se fait autour des informations. Si la démocratie, c'est simplement échanger des opinions, les plus folles ou les plus raisonnables, c'est la guerre de tous contre tous.
In an attempt to compete against aggregators and to create new successful financial models, many traditional newspapers have been experimenting. One of those experiments is paywalls, charging people to read the stories they put online.
In 2011, we were told by media pundits and others, our competition, that this was doomed to fail, that it was dumb, that it was ill-conceived. And now 2 years later, the whole tenor of that conversation has changed completely. The original impetus for our decision to move to pay was about retraining readers, users, consumers, that valuable content should be content that people pay for.
Le New York Times a anticipé sur la question du payant, parce que pour moi, c'est la clé. La clé, c'est que si on est dans la presse de qualité, la presse d'information, la presse de référence, sur le web, il faut défendre la valeur. Et on ne peut pas faire la gratuité d'un côté et le payant de l'autre. Il faut choisir. Il faut prendre le risque du payant. C'est le levier de création de valeur.
So far, the paywall has paid off for the New York Times, with over 700,000 digital subscribers. But at Columbia University, Bill Gruskin is cautious.
I think it's been moderately successful on a very temporary basis. Everybody points to the New York Times because they quickly got 500,000, 600,000, 700,000 subscribers to their digital product. No other news organizations in the United States are even close to that. What you see from a lot of them are 10, 20, 30,000 people paying $50 or $100 a year. It's not a huge amount of money. But the problem is, as they say, trees don't grow to the sky. I mean, every publication has its limit.
There's no doubt in my mind that everybody who's in the business of publishing content online has a segment of their audience that's willing to pay for that content because it's differentiated in some way. If you don't have a segment of your audience willing to pay, you might as well go out of business because you're not doing something that's really valued by people.
The New York Times is sort of unique among U.S. publications in that it has a sufficient number of people around the country who are sufficiently passionate about the product that they are willing to pay for it online. I think most newspapers will be experimenting with paywalls in one way or another. Many already have been. It's hard to see that many successes thus far.
Het is vreselijk moeilijk om die omslag terug te maken. Wij zijn de slager die 15 jaar lang zijn biefstuk heeft weggegeven en die nu zegt aan mensen die elke week in die slagerij komen, die zegt van je moet betalen. Die zeggen hoezo betalen? Hè? Want ze hebben nooit moeten betalen voor dat biefstuk. Hè? Dus, en die snappen het ook niet. Hè?
My first piece of advice would be to go talk to your readers about what they might be willing to pay for. And is there a way to build a product or an offering around that at a price point that people find reasonable? If so, get started right away. That would be my advice. I wish we had started sooner.
Because while traditional publishing companies debate the merits of paywalls, the ever-changing world of digital technology is creating whole new kinds of journalism.
Already the capital of finance, fashion, and advertising, New York City is fast becoming the place to be for tech startups.
The market is one of those markets that's so big that I don't really spend time thinking about how big it is. Brand advertising is gigantic.
BuzzFeed is a different story. The social content hub relies on sharing, not Googling, gets double the traffic from Facebook than from a Google search, and 40% of its traffic is actually mobile.
New York City, a hotbed of journalistic creativity and innovation. Here near the Flatiron Building is Silicon Alley, the heart of New York's internet and new media companies. This is BuzzFeed, an entirely digital news organization. Through its website and app, it gets around 80 million individual readers a month.
People weren't sure what to make of us when we came on the scene. They were saying sort of BuzzFeed is all about cats is a kind of a common thing. BuzzFeed is about cats. How are they gonna do serious news?
Jack Shepard is BuzzFeed's editorial director. From his desk, he coordinates 200 young reporters, and their work is shifting the way we read news.
We always thought is that actually the way that people consume news nowadays, if you think about what your Facebook feed is like, Facebook is, it'll be an amazing breaking news story from a Supreme Court decision, and then it'll be an update about how your aunt is doing, and then it'll be your brother sharing cute pictures of his cats, and then it'll be your sister sharing baby pictures, and then another sort of breaking news story about the future of journalism or whatever. And that's all kind of, people are really, really used to consuming news in that way.
BuzzFeed covers it all, from in-depth political analysis to movies, reviews, to pictures of cats. But BuzzFeed didn't start as a news company.
We began as a technology company, which is still very much in our DNA. And we thought a lot about kind of building algorithms to surface really great content that people would want to share. And then kind of as the media landscape evolved to being really, really focused on social in particular and sharing, we were in a really good position to kind of take advantage of that because we had gotten great at, with a very small team, writing things that would go viral and that would sort of get spread way beyond our small seed of readers.
BuzzFeed, like a number of digital sites, had a few advantages going in. One was the expertise in technology. And then the other thing that they had from the very beginning was a strong sense of audience.
News coming from a friend is vastly more powerful than something that you accidentally ended up on or something that comes from an old broadcast model of one person deciding what the news is and telling many people.
In the digital news revolution, journalists and editors are no longer the only ones setting the news agenda. Through social media, each one of us becomes an editor.
We live in an era now of a network where it's not just a broadcast model of one to many. It's a model of lots of different people who are networked, who are at work, and they're tweeting things and sharing things on Facebook and emailing things to each other. And so if you think about your network as being your publishers in a way, rather than thinking about yourself as being sort of deciding what's news, it can be very liberating.
Not only does BuzzFeed present the kind of variety you might find on Facebook, it uses Facebook, Twitter, and other social media sites to distribute its content. The medium is changing, and so is the message.
The thing that is kind of central to what BuzzFeed does in particular is really always thinking about social. Our reporters are writing with Twitter in mind. They'll think about, how can I write a headline that would be a tweet?
Being a technical company first, BuzzFeed was already in the number-crunching business. So when it became a news business, it developed advanced mathematical formulae to decide which stories to tell and how to tell them.
And so we have kind of very much like a starve the losers mentality. So the stuff that's not doing well, that's not fitting our needs of actually kind of getting out there and being really social, will kind of sink to the bottom. And the algorithm helps to kind of do that and surface the stuff that's doing really well.
So how does BuzzFeed's number system work? That they're keeping to themselves. But the basic idea is this. BuzzFeed can calculate which of its stories people are reading and sharing most often. It can then give these stories a higher profile, which in turn can make them more likely to be read. It's a feedback loop based on popular opinion.
You know, one of the issues with print publications is you never really know what people are reading in your newspaper or in your magazine. On a website, you know exactly how many people are reading it. You know where they're coming from. You know how long they're spending on each story. And so in an old print publication, people would just kind of publish stories, and the assumption was everybody read everything. That was never true, but we had no idea how many people were actually reading story X on page 1 versus story Y on page 3.
Not far from BuzzFeed's Manhattan offices is a company that creates this kind of technology. Now, as you read a website, the website reads you.
Now, when you start to see data in real time, and very special kinds of data, it changes everything.
Tony Hale is the CEO of Chartbeat, a company that buys and sells software that analyzes how every individual uses news websites, down to the smallest detail.
We're getting pings every few seconds, and that means we can see, are you actually reading? Are you writing something? Are you scrolling? I can see how many people are on my site right now. I can see the stories that they're liking right now. What's working for my audience? What's not working? Did they come from Facebook? Did they come from Twitter? Did they come from someone referring to us? I can see what are my most engaging pieces of content. So that's where I can find diamonds in the rough, which I can promote. All of these things I can understand immediately, and I can act on them, change the headline, change the image, try and communicate the value of this story in a better way. It's not about clicks, it's about people.
People and money. The more people that read stories on your website or your stories on Facebook or Twitter, the more you can charge advertisers.
It's about people's time and attention. And when you have that, that's when you can build a loyal, returning audience and something that brands actually care about and value.
Brand is the watchword in the digital media world.
And what you're seeing is an understanding that the future of publishers is going to involve having a loyal audience that they can monetize in a variety of ways. And that means not just trying to maximize traffic anymore, but trying to build an audience who knows who you are, likes what you do, and comes back. That's very, very different from before.
And that's how companies like BuzzFeed make money, taking what they learn about how readers read and turning it into advertising.
So what we do is we work with brands to help them to take the principles that we've learned from editorial and to help the brands kind of create content that is really shareable. And so it's all the same principles except kind of from the point of view of giving a message about a brand or whatever it is.
Shareable advertising. Ads that look a lot like news. It's controversial. And there are those concerned that the drive to make stories popular in order to bring in more advertisers will lead to lowest common denominator news.
Nous, journalistes, on doit être dans une sorte d'intégrisme sur cette question de l'information. Car notre adversaire est là. Il est là dans les télévisions, il est là dans les radios, il est là sur Internet. Celui qui va dissoudre le journalisme dans le divertissement. Et celui-là, il marche forcément à la gratuité. Parce que lui, il marche à l'audience, à la masse, et il faut faire rire, et il faut faire du people, et il faut faire de l'anecdote. Il marche à la foule. Nous, journalistes, nous marchons au public. La foule, elle est anonyme, elle zappe, elle passe, elle regarde dans la même direction. Elle n'est pas dans une conversation démocratique. Nous, on fidélise des publics. Et le public, il discute, il se pose, il réfléchit. Et donc ça, c'est notre enjeu démocratique fondamental.
So there's always this fear, especially around real-time data, that you're going to stop being a great quality publisher and just write Miley Cyrus stories all day just to get the clicks. And that is utterly untrue. We've seen real-time data in publications across the world, and after a little less than a month or so of using this kind of stuff, people actually realize that they're not changing their mission. They're still focusing on great content, but they just have so much more information now to be able to make the right decisions.
It's still thinking about making things that a huge amount of people will really, really like and respond to. And that turns out not to be the lowest common denominator stuff. It turns out to be really, really good stuff and really interesting and compelling stuff and new things, and kind of, I don't know, people are a lot smarter than they're given credit for. And so writing for a large audience of people who are really going to love our stuff makes us write good things rather than the other way around.
Ik ben bang dat we met veel gratis nieuws gaan naar sites die door algoritmes gestuurd worden. En dat je daar een beetje Brave New World krijgt. Want het economisch model van zo'n site is nu eenmaal zo. We willen zoveel mogelijk kliks, want we willen zoveel mogelijk advertentie-euro's omgezet zien. Dus moeten we hier brengen dat wat de lezer wil lezen op onze site. En zijn dat blote madammen of zijn dat honden en katten, dan geven we dat. Maar wij zijn gelukkig meer bezig met de vraag: wat vinden wij dat de lezer moet weten, dan wat vinden we dat de lezer wil weten.
So, do you give readers what they want to read or give readers what they should read? And I've always felt that was kind of a false question. Newspapers have long had comic strips, they've had crossword puzzles, they've had advice columns, they devote a lot of space to sports, and there's nothing really wrong with that, particularly if what you're trying to do is get people, is appeal to people's interests on a bunch of different levels.
The Columbia School of Journalism is trying